Welcome to the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Since 2010, the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska has worked toward one goal, a food and water secure world. One in which global food security is ensured without compromising the use of water to meet other essential human and environmental needs. It's a daunting vision, but one that is vitally important. This podcast amplifies the voices of those making waves in this space. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hi, I'm Frances Hayes, Director of Communications and Public Relations, and your host for today's episode of the Water for Food podcast. I'm joined by Roric Paulman, producer and owner of Paulman Farms. Paulman Farms is located just south of Sutherland, Nebraska, and in the heart of the Ogallala Aquifer, comprised of both irrigated and rain-fed farmland. The farm was established and harvested its first crop in 1985 and is located in Lincoln, Keith, and Perkins counties, operating in 3 groundwater natural resource districts: Twin Platte, Upper Republican, and Middle Republican. Roric, I'm excited to meet with you one-on-one today to discuss this topic of agricultural innovation and technology through the perspective of a Nebraska farmer. So to start us off, Roric, tell us a little bit about yourself, your operation, and why technology's intersection with agriculture is so top of mind for you.
Well, it is. It's an obvious buzzword across the whole industry. I mean, that's kind of the foundation of it. But the difference is here. We have always. Maybe I should state that I'm probably on the bleeding edge. I've taken a very proactive approach on technology. I'm third generation. Our son, Zach, assumed the daily operations. He's fourth generation. And occasionally you'll hear from my grandson, who's 7 back here. So that'd be, you're in that 5th generation that is looking at it. And of course, a lot of those tools have got to land in their hand. And the data that is produced has got to be meaningful, and it's got to be able to start to and evolve into a real-time decision platform. So those technologies are occurring at the speed of light. I used to say 10 years, now it's 2 years, and I think 18 months isn't a stretch now on how you see and hear of technologies that are evolving, that startups. More people have got a better way to bake bread and break it in some cases. So being able to do that is important. And ultimately, the consumer confidence in our food chain is important. And that data and our stewardship and conservation platform has got to be at the forefront.
In 2019, you were awarded the Kramer Groundwater Achievement Award from the Groundwater Foundation as an outstanding Nebraskan who has made a substantive contribution to the conservation and protection of Nebraska's groundwater. Tell us what this award means to you.
Oh, gosh. I'm going to give you a little history first. So, we grew up when this ground was developed, when they were, poking straws into the aquifer and putting up center pivots. And so, I have watched from the evolution of a water drive pivot all the way up to the state of the art, variable rate application and individual nozzle control of what it is today, and mechanized irrigation now to drip and all of those other complexities. So, the idea that we simply irrigated to irrigate really irked me, because there's a cost to it, there's an investment to it, and we believe, and that has been solidified over time, a responsibility to the conservation and stewardship of that resource, and including, obviously the soil and air and everything else, but the priority was water. And the reason is all at once the conflicts between surface water diverters and groundwater. And then I live really close to Gerald Gentleman Station, which is a 1,300 megawatt coal-fired power plant that provides electricity to 1 million homes in Nebraska. And so they needed water to cool that plant. And in the evolution of LB 962 and all the other laws that came into play, it started creating and enhancing conflicts. And to resolve those conflicts took a great amount of time and resources and thoughtfulness by leaders inside of our own state, also the water users themselves, producers, landowners, regulatory folks. So the idea that all of those things had to occur and start to develop all pulling on the same wagon together really was a struggle. So I was a part of the integrated management planning process at the NRD level all the way through to the basin level. And I experienced that conflict in real time. I got to stand nose to nose with surface water diverters, and basically, we were calling each other every name in the book except responsible and good stewards. We were talking about what we thought we were doing wrong, each one of us, and that evolved again. And so those pieces of the puzzle led us to I founded a group called the Nebraska Water Balance Alliance. I was part of the founding group. I didn't found them, I was part of it. And looking at new technologies because they were evolving, soil moisture probes and better weather and drought tolerant hybrids and conservation tillage. And then all at once the data came that helped you aggregate those. And it was an incredible journey that made it really obvious that there wasn't a place that anyone was taking the initiative to demonstrate those potential game changers, those integrations, but more importantly, tell the story to the end user, to the consumer, to the regulator, that these things are all possible if we all hook onto the sled and pull together. And so we moved it to the farm. We made our farm a demonstration place, and we started inviting in these technologies and startups and researchers to say, listen, how do we do this better? I want to collaborate. We want to be home to all and know there's no favorites, and let's see what we can do to make this better.
Well, congratulations on that award. And I think it culminates a lifetime of efforts and working together with those in your community. So what role do you see growers having in the future in protecting both our groundwater and surface water? And then I'll add to that question just a bit. What do you see others' role in that, whether that's just those in the community, consumers? How do we all work together to protect that groundwater and surface water?
Well, we have to have a willingness to invest the time, no different than we invest time in our families, our communities, our churches, our schools. But the producer, needs to volunteer their services, but also be asked. I've attended a lot of meetings within Washington, D.C. and Lincoln that didn't include one producer, but that's all they talked about is the responsibility of the people that are charged with being the steward were never asked to be at the table. There was a regulatory framework, or there was a commodity board or a farm bureau or somebody that was there. They were obviously spokesmen, but it never reached down to the people that were actually making the decisions. But then once we get there, all of us, is how do we take the time to see it through each other's eyes and meet somewhere in the middle so that we can start to have meaningful conversations, and that the idea that the resource is the common denominator, and we need support from research and dollars and recognition, and we need to be able to say as producers that, hey, get us the tools and we'll figure out how to make them work and move on to the next evolution of what that looks like. When you ask that broad question, I think it behooves all of us, whether it's industry, whether it's our university, whether it's our local regulatory, or right down to the producer landowner. We need to figure out how to continually convene that broad stakeholder process, as opposed to waiting until somebody says, this is the way you're going to do it.
I think that's a really important point, that there's a lot of things that we maybe think we understand that we don't until we talk to the person that's actually experiencing that and doing it every day. So what resources are available for producers wanting to be involved with water security? We obviously, as an institute, like working with young growers, but where would you tell them to start, and what resources would you point them to?
Well, it starts with your local agronomist or trusted advisor, and then finding out or at least researching how much they know and where did their information come from. And our institutions, the Water for Food, UNL, the NRDs and NDNR have a compilation of not only bright minds, but also research and extension education pieces that have been done over time that we haven't done the best job of putting it into sound bites or small snippets of interesting articles that pique at producers. All of us are different. All of us learn differently. All of us expect the delivery of that education or those materials differently. And I think that's where we are today. Is we're going, oh wow, we've got all this stuff, but it's on a shelf, or it's in a book, or it's on a podcast. But how do we figure out, how do we touch those resource managers, the landowner, farmer, golf course people? I don't care who it is, municipal water guy, or surface water diverter. How do we touch their lives? How do we put it in that perspective? How do we tell that story? And it's all a system. And you can't just pluck portions out of that system and expect to make significant changes without affecting other parts of that system. So seeding rates and fertility and infiltration rates and soil types and soil health, and oh my gosh, there's a lot that a producer has to have. We ask them for a lot in a day's time, but the significance of it is we only get a soundbite. If you considered a slice of salami, that's about all the time you really actually going to get to have of a producer's day.
To expand on that a bit, I love talking about success stories because I think that's something that we can build on rather than always focusing on what doesn't work. I like to focus on what does work. What successes have you seen of producers, researchers, policymakers, communities working together to solve some of these big problems in ag and water and food sustainability?
The overarching models that were put together, they were put together and then all at once, the idea that they would ask a producer for their meter data and then their planting and their evapotranspiration rates and, understanding all of those things and runoff and hydrologically connected. And the fact that the producers went right to work on it. And we're willing to step up to the plate and say, hey, using a soil moisture probe, I've gone from 12 acre inches to 9.5 in an average rain-fed season on withdrawals from groundwater. And when you aggregate that over basins or over regions or over Huck 12s, and then start to see the numbers, it was remarkable. And we were all on the outside pointing the fingers at each other, asking ourselves, is that water real? Is it modeled water? And when we started putting some meat on the bones, it really started that whole conversation. Those are the success stories. The fact that we can start to take these ideas and concepts, and innovation occurs at the speed of light, but adoption that's the plodding turtle. I mean, that's the part that unless you have a ROI, an investment ROI to the farm, it's hard for producers to step in there and spend the money. But if the ROI is in water that is conserved and is accounted for in their bank, or if it's a delivery diversion on an expected surface water, then all at once, those are numbers that we all get our arms around. And those are the successes that we're starting to recognize that hey, we play in this sandbox together long enough, and we collaborate and continually convene the stakeholder conversations. It just continues to expand. So the research that existed, the applied research, then through extension, and then through the delivery of these global ideas, that it's come from all over the world. A lot of the work that I've seen comes from Israel. I didn't know much about Israel's water challenges, or I farmed in South Africa. We pumped river water to raise popcorn. And I also farmed in Belize, and where it was a rainforest atmosphere. We planted orange trees. And until I had that kind of experience that I really kind of get a grasp on it. But to just simply say that that a soil moisture probe or a water meter or a field level weather station or true understanding or evaluation of ET fixed everything. No, it's ongoing. And that's the story we have to tell, is that we can't stop here.
I was unaware of all of the places that you farmed. That's very interesting. What sets Nebraska apart? I mean, I have some ideas of my own, but the Institute was very intentionally founded in the state of Nebraska with the University of Nebraska. But in your eyes, what makes Nebraska a state that other states can learn lessons from? How do we function differently? Do we function differently?
Well, the model of the NRDs obviously has been touted everywhere, and of course it is an extremely successful component of Nebraska, and I've always raised the ire of some by saying, we're the number one irrigated state in the nation by default, because the state that has had to figure out what to do with declining resources, retired acres, and so all at once that elevated us into number one. And I said, if we're going to be number one, we really should act like it. We have the major the primary major manufacturers of mechanized irrigation. We have the ability to look at and have the perspective, I guess, of saying we also have over 60% of the Ogallala aquifer under us. We export water annually. We've got this huge grass-covered sand dune that is this huge sponge, and we've told that story, whether it's row crop or livestock or surface and groundwater. Nebraska is this huge machine, and some of the outtakes of that are we actually export water annually, and that's where I see Nebraska has really taken the lead. But I'm going to go right back to my statement that if we're number one, let's act like it. And I believe that our legislature has taken a lead and invested in it. I think that DWFI is a great example and top of the heap in terms of what that should look like from Nebraska's perspective. I think it's a huge deal, and supported externally by not only the international parts of it and contributions, but also internally from its producers, landowners, and other investors. It's the right thing to do.
And you've just talked a little bit about the Institute's role in all of this. Now I'd like to ask why you decided to take the time out of all that you do to be on the International Advisory Panel, but also what kinds of things should we be focused on in the future as an institute? I think there's been a lot of change over the last couple of years in all aspects of life and agriculture and supply chains and those type of things. What should we really have our focus be on going forward?
I'm not one of those very focused persons in terms of actually picking out specifics. I just see it as a great big mission, and that mission is always in flux. Because it's just like being a farmer is, I don't know if it's going to rain tomorrow, what the forecast says. I don't know if the bugs are going to attack or the hail's coming or if the pivot's going to break down or if I can't get a part for my combine. But we have the resources and the people and the interests that will support that and get behind it and work. But you also have to have that convening source. So the Institute, to me, will continue and needs to really settle into that convening idea even more than it is today.
In this podcast, we recently interviewed Matt Foley from the Combine and Jackson Stansel of Sentinel Fertigation, both very focused on ag tech and entrepreneurship and that sort of thing. The Institute supports lots of students that are focused on other things as well, but a lot of ag tech. What do you hope this next generation of ag tech entrepreneurs will have on the industry, and what advice would you give them as a grower in Nebraska?
I said it earlier in the podcast about innovation occurs at the speed of light, and ideas. We are not short of ideas, and that innovation is critical to expanding our thoughts and our interests and opportunities of change and reevaluating that stewardship and conservation mindset. Adoption is what I really see from young growers, is how do we facilitate the management of these devices and sensors and data, because we're doing that, and more are coming online. We don't have a lack of that investment in them or even delivery of them, either in timing or in ideas, and challenging this next group to adopt them, or even take it beyond that is how do you take this complex system and be able to pass on or invest your time in feedback to help make that better, quicker, faster. We've worked with probably 20 or 30 different startups and still work with quite a few and invest in some. The fact that the money is available is fantastic, but that guiding principles, that supporting research, that delivery piece out of the Institute, again, it's all about telling the story. We've invested in finding out what the challenges are and the opportunities that exist to address those challenges. How do we tell that story? How do we deliver the message and continually reinforce and readdress those? That's the hill we got to climb.
One of my favorite quotes of yours is, "Don't explain to me how the clock was built. All I want to know is what time it is." And I think that's maybe something we struggle with as the Institute sometimes. How the clock was built is very important because it makes the time be correct. But when we're talking with growers and we're trying to get them to adopt certain technologies that are good technologies, we don't need to tell them all this unless asked. We need to ensure that they trust us, that we've built the clock correctly, but we just need to give them the clock. I hope you don't mind me interpreting your quote a little bit more, and hopefully I got that correctly, but I've always thought that summed it up pretty well.
Young men and women out of the Institute, out of our high schools and public schools and private schools and community colleges and trade schools, everybody brings a little bit of something to the table. We obviously want to talk about how we derive that. I always want to talk about when I grow a crop. What a lot of people don't know about me is I could care less if I ever drove a tractor, and yet I've farmed nearly all of my life. And what puts that in perspective is the delivery of the consumable. We have all of this stuff that says this is a great product, and yet investing the time and having a return on that investment or an impact that's measurable back through stream flows or better quality aquifer or supply. And I finally had to step back myself and really try to meet them where they were and see it through their goggles, because I thought I had all the answers. And I think a lot of us, with our education, with our experiences, with our investments, think we have the same thing. So how do we flip that light switch? And that's what you're asking. So my first response to my engineering friends is that he says, I just want to know what time it is. That's all I want to know. And then I'll decide whether the background noise that it took to build that clock, if I need that level of detail or if I need that level of engagement, to change my decision or to move my trust meter up, 10 percentage points. But it all goes right back to, that 1 acre, that one landowner, that relationship, stakeholder driven open-mindedness.
I want you to think now about your span of harvests and in all your years and decades of work in farming and your work in sustainability and technology. And I believe you're coming up on your 38th harvest this fall. What are some of those big takeaways that you can share with us and our listeners today?
The takeaway is this, is for as much time as you invest in your operation and step out of your comfort zone of running your operation, of raising your family and being a community leader. Of course, I didn't know what I was doing when I was 28 years old and taken off to where today, your experiences change how you see them, but the storyline is still the same. It is oftentimes conflict keeps you away from the better conversations on both sides. And so that is my takeaway, is I was uncomfortable, but I also knew that when they told me that my farm was hydrologically connected and that when I pumped my 70 plus wells at the time, that I had a significant impact on stream flows. I said, baloney. And on the flip side of that, when they started storing the water and not running it down the river, and environmental accounts and different timing and doing things that were, I'm going, now wait a minute. If I impact you, don't you impact me? And obviously I wanted to do away with that altogether. How do we move forward? How do we have meaningful conversations that get both of us in a better place? You know, you've only got about 40 crops most of the time as a farmer to make those differences, to build your first shop or own your first brand new tractor. So you're looking over your shoulder a bit at where I am today. You just didn't know it early on. So given where we are, I think that conflict resolution and the acceptance of it and being able to, eat a little humble pie was hard. But I think it actually was one of the best things.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective, and for your work on the International Advisory Panel, and for always saying yes to everything that we ask of you. We're so appreciative to have growers like you just 4 hours away from us. So it's always a pleasure to see you and talk to you. So thanks for taking time out of the field today. We really appreciate the valuable insight that you always provide, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and others to ensure a more water and food secure world for future generations, both here in our state of Nebraska and around the world.
Thanks for joining us this time on the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Make sure to visit our website, waterforfood.nebraska.edu, to view show notes or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.